Greetings, guardsmen and yeomen. Today we're going to be looking into the bulwark of humanity and the faithful, at least the Christian faithful, against the forces of hell. The eternal city that was completely rebuilt after a heretical superweapon destroyed its foundations, and now serves as the front line and be-all end-all defense of both Europa and North Africa. We're of course talking about the city of New Antioch and the Principality of New Antioch. The Principality is the organized force leading the Crusade directly. We're going to be talking into the history of the city, its real-world connections to our own Antioch, and how it developed from a Crusader state to what we know now. And of course, why is it so important in the world of Trench Crusade? Going into its organizations, forces, and specialized units that call the city home. To really get into the importance of Antioch, you have to go back into its origins. Antioch was actually founded as far back as 300 BCE by Seleucus I Nicator, the former general of Alexander the Great and the founder of the Seleucid Empire, where it soon became the western terminus for the Silk Road, making it a massive trading hub, and command of all the strategic roads from both north-south and east-west directions. Antioch was a jewel of the Seleucid kingdom until 64 BCE, when the city would be annexed by Rome and made the capital the Roman province of Syria. There it became the third largest city of the Roman Empire in both size and importance, only being beaten out by the cities of Alexandria and Rome itself. It is stated that it possessed magnificent temples, theaters, aqueducts, and baths. The city itself would be the headquarters of the Roman garrison in Syria, whose principal duty was the defense of the empire's eastern borders from Persian attacks. Its Christian connections run deep. Antioch was also the earliest centers of Christian thought, and would be the place where Christ and his followers were first called Christians. The city would also be the headquarters of the missionary St. Paul around 47 to 55 CE. The Church of Antioch also had the distinction of being founded by the apostles Peter and Paul, giving the bishops of Antioch immense influence over theology and ecclesiastic politics. The city would remain in Roman hands up until being captured by the Persians in both 540 and 611 CE respectively. Antioch would be absorbed into the Arab Caliphate in 637 CE, where it would shrink to the status of a small town. The Byzantines would be able to recapture the city in 969, though it would eventually fall again to the Seljuk Turks in 1084, leading us to its most important part of history in connection to Trench Crusade, the First Crusades of 1098. The city of Antioch served as the last major hurdle for the Crusaders before they can reach the holy city of Jerusalem. The Crusader forces would reach the city by 1097, and would lay siege for over a year, eventually taking it through hard struggle. Though they were unable to take the entirety of the city, most notably the citadel, still remained within Seljuk hands. Even worse for the Crusaders, the largest relief army of the Muslim forces would arrive and besiege the Crusaders within their hard-won prize. The Crusaders endured months of starvation and disease. Morale had tanked, despite the efforts of the leader of the Crusade, Bishop Adhemar, to improve it through religious ceremonies and fastings. Many Crusade leaders would even desert at this stage, with one telling a Byzantine relief army that the cause was lost and to not even bother. This relief army simply just turned around and headed back to Byzantium. The surviving Crusader leaders decided on one final gambit to break the siege. A massive sally forth of cavalry and armored knights, many taking part as they would wish to die on their horseback with lances and shields, than an empty stomach behind the walls of the city. This sally forth would be led by Bishop Adhemar himself, surprisingly a very adept fighter of many years, and he within his hands held the Holy Lance, the very symbol of the Crusades. And if the Christian chroniclers are to be believed, a miracle took place. Saints themselves rode with the Crusaders, using their divine powers and holy fury to smash through the Saracen Muslim army, shattering it completely, killing their commander, and sending the rest of these Saracen princes back into the sands, never to return. The Crusaders offered the city to Christ himself in his victory. Yeah, no, not at all. In all reality, it turns out that the Muslim force was actually quite fractured, much like the Crusader armies. The Muslim force was actually an allied force of multiple different states, all of them commanded by their own princes that actually hated each other more than anything. Many of them had been fighting each other before the Christians arrived, and there was the whole thing of the Shia-Sunni split. Not even going to get into that can of worms, because, oh god. Though for better context, the commander of this force was Sunni, and many of his allies were Shia. So there was both religious and secular reasons that they absolutely hated each other and wouldn't have their backs. So the moment things started to go bad and some crazed Europeans just charged out of the gated city, they decided that, nah, not worth it, and headed back to their own states. They had their own problems to deal with. Even convincing a massive Muslim relief army heading to Antioch to simply just turn around, stating that it was not worth it. The commander of this force also thought it was not worth it. Why risk their men's lives for a bunch of Europeans within the desert? This allowed the Crusaders to completely control Antioch, with the citadel surrendering just a couple days later. Though the celebrations were short-lived, as a massive outbreak of bubonic plague occurred within the city, one of its main victims being Bishop Adhemar. Adhemar was the heart and soul of the Crusaders, and his death would be the beginning of the corruption of the Crusaders by the forces of hell. The Principality of Antioch would be formed just after the siege, first under the control of Crusader Lord Bohemond, but later would be usurped by Tancred. Antioch would survive for over 200 years with very little issues within the Levant. In fact, they even made a deal with Saladin to keep the Principality intact. There would be successor wars that would end up dooming the Principality, and in 1268 the Christians were finally pushed out of the city for good. Though this is where the timelines split. In our world, they remain a Crusader kingdom and last till 1268, but they become something much more important in the world of Trench Crusade. For in 1099, the Crusaders finally reach Jerusalem. There, their corruption by demonic entities is complete. The Knights Templar spot an unholy relic beneath the city and fall to its influence, opening up a portal of hell on earth. The city of Jerusalem is annihilated in the ritual. Thousands of holy warriors fall to demons, and legions of them pour into the Levant. In 1101 comes the year of the Three Battles, where heretical forces capture the vast majority of the Levant. One of the few remaining locations is that of Antioch itself, and in response, in 1102, Antioch is fortified, becoming the citadel of Christendom, the last and first line of defense, the bulwark of Christian faithful. Surviving the rise of Kobar, the first tyrant of the 66, the wars of trans-Calvinism that split the church in two in fierce internal conflict, to when Beelzebub unleashed their Black Grail, and the start of the Corpse Wars, Antioch remained. It would be there that war prophet Angelos discovered his formula of orichalcum steel, able to greatly extend the defenses of not only Antioch, but the faithful itself. It remained until 1545, when Antioch would be utterly destroyed by an unknown infernal weapon. This weapon is still unknown by church historians, though the level of destruction we could guess is probably equivalent of a nuke or some massive cannon. But whatever it was, it completely annihilated the city of Antioch, allowing the heretical legions to spread throughout Anatolia and destroy Byzantium, only being turned away by the Order of the Dragon within Wallachia. Though something happened within the ruins of Antioch, its survivors remained, and still they continued to fight to be a thorn in the side of the heretics. This convinced the Sword Council of Vienna that maybe Antioch wasn't lost for good, and thus began plans of its rebuilding. For the Sword Council, the idea of rebuilding Antioch was paramount. Not only was it a bulwark against the tide of heretical forces, a check on their power within the Levant, it also served as the wall against its invasions of Europa, keeping the fight relatively over there in the Levant rather than their own backyards in Europa and North Africa. Barring, of course, if you forget about Avignon. But it also served as a stopping off point for Crusader forces, a dagger to the heart of Jerusalem and the Hell Portal. It also had its biggest boon, a propaganda piece, a point of unity for all the faithful nations, which had just been rocked by internal strife. Antioch became the home of all hopes, a uniting factor of all the disparate states of Christianity. This will be the Citadel, God's chosen location to fight against hell. So naturally, a unanimous vote pushed for the rebuilding of Antioch. And rebuilding began in 1559. They also voted upon a yearly tithe by all the faithful nations, consisting of supply convoys of food, weapons, ammunition, building material, and skilled engineers and workers to rebuild the city and fortify its defenses. And like a phoenix rising from the ashes, the walls of New Antioch were completed in 1595, and a new principality is formed, the Principality of New Antioch. Since that day, the walls of New Antioch have repulsed over 8 heretical sieges, with the 77 towers of New Antioch never falling to heretical hands, due to various defensive networks, from anchorite shrines embedded into the very walls, to 50-foot war mechs made of pure orichalcum, to 300-foot tall mobile artillery platforms defending the walls themselves. Hundreds of field artillery batteries are permanently sited to no man's land. The Synod of Strategic Prophecies have emplaced hundreds of communications networks and radar stations watching for any sign of heretical movement. Flak batteries patrol the skies, along with squadrons of aircraft and divisions of tanks. Hundreds of miles of trenches have been constructed, with millions of men personally dedicated to the Duke themselves, guarding the lines with trench mortars and heavy machine guns. All with the single goal: Antioch must not fall. It is truly a citadel without measure. All organizations with some connection to the Christian Crusade has a station within New Antioch. The Mendelist Order has their main cathedral laboratories, where their Metacrists produce the communicants, and are stored somewhere underneath the city. The hulking beasts of the Order and their Mendelist handlers are a daily occurrence among the streets of New Antioch. The Synod of Strategic Prophecies has their second largest locational headquarters outside of their valley within the city as well, and help to maintain and create the communications network seen throughout the defenses of the city, from radar platforms and communications posts to telegraph offices, allowing for early warning of heretical forces and the quick reaction of ductile troops to any form of attack. In the streets, officers of the Office of Propagation of Virtue look around for any signs of heretical corruption, though for the most part they actually turn a blind eye to most socially accepted vices, deeds such as smoking, gambling, and other things that soldiers and civilians can get up to in any kind of city. Though if they spot anything that goes against church doctrine in any way, they get known to come down hard, and are seen by workers and soldiers in New Antioch as vastly overzealous, and can be very similar to a 40k commissar, though more one from actual lore rather than the meme. A commissar that's willing to work with soldiers and civilians rather than just random executions. Though it should go without saying that there are a lot of executions. As it's stated in lore, the weekly execution of heretics is a common sight of entertainment in New Antioch. A good weekend out with the kids, especially if they're burned at the stake. And of course, the church's navies are heavily involved in the defense of New Antioch. The only route to supply the city is by sea, so much of the church's main fleet is in the Mediterranean, placed to keep the convoys to New Antioch running smoothly while they're still harried by infiltrators and sea raiders, making the journeys fraught with danger. Heretical submarines still prowl, but this is the only place where the faithful navies can keep in parity with the heretics. They are literally playing Greyhound and cat and mouse games with the heretical submarine fleets. They have also fortified the island of Crete to better defend these New Antioch convoys and provide support to the city. They must keep the harbor open. Thousands of tons of materials and soldiers make their way to the city, all in part to the tithe to defend New Antioch and keep it running. These materials are needed for factories of all sorts, from those that produce civilian goods to those producing tanks, armor, and weapons of all kinds. Both melee and ranged are churned out constantly within the city. It is stated that their forges are white-hot 24/7, and a thick layer of smog covers the city. Thousands of workers work tirelessly to produce these goods for the soldiers. So much so that it's stated thousands of workers die each year due to overwork and factory accidents. Though they continue this relentless march, Many shrines and statues actually praise the workers for their divine hard work. The Institutes of Metallurgy and Warfare have campuses within the city, and church engineers work tirelessly with orichalcum and other divine metals to make ever-new designs for the front lines. The territory around New Antioch proving to be a great testing ground for the newest tanks, airplanes, and mechs, hoping that the next invention would finally be able to break the stalemate of the front lines and advance the Crusade. Designs of all kinds are seen being tested by the church engineers, from tanks such as the IS-2 of Soviet Russia and the FT tank of France, to fighter jets, and even things such as automatic shotguns and brand new suits of armor. And lucky citizens can even see these church engineers trundling them out to the front lines throughout the streets of New Antioch. New Antioch remains a constant beehive of activity. All who dwell within the city understand they are the first line of defense, and the first place to feel the full wrath of the princes of hell. It is grim reality to remember that there is no way they could survive a full-on attack by a combined force of the princes, though they are determined to go down fighting, to be the thorn in the side of the princes for as long as possible. Though there is a slight comfort that these princes are constantly fighting each other, more than they can fight the faithful, never finding a true chance to unite. This influx of men and materials has turned New Antioch into a true cosmopolitan melting pot of every culture of the faithful. One might observe the hussars of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth trading stories with the last remnants of the Varangian Guard, or hear the sermons of a street preacher from Ere, extolling the soldiery of Ethiopia to lay down their lives for the cause. There is also a myriad of pilgrims, religious organizations, and other denominations that make their way to the city, and of course trench pilgrim processions and even Crusader night orders. Though not officially sanctioned by the church, trench pilgrim processions are a common sight, and honestly are rather welcomed. Let the crazy zealots die on the front lines while everybody else can stay back and defend the walls. As far as the Crusader Knights, while heavily distrusted, organizations like the Hospitallers or the Teutonic Order are still seen as heroes and will be given ample supply as long as they leave quickly. Though for those that don't follow church doctrine and are deemed renegades, it's shoot on sight. Many in the faithful deem the Crusader Knights the whole reason the calamity exists in the first place, and no quarter is given. They join thousands of volunteers who pledge their service to the city as yeomen. Though for the majority of warbands, they remain loyal to their kings and leadership back in their home states. Many warbands have simply joined for the supposed treasures and relics found across no man's land, while others do secret missions for unknown masters. Most notably, the Papal Intervention Force refuses any orders from the ducal command staff, only answering to the Holy See and to the War Cardinals. Their missions are unknown, and they've been even seen fighting off even New Antioch warbands should they get in their way. For others, like Abyssinia, it's to earn glory upon the battlefield for prestige back home, while for the men of Ere, it's to honor long-term debts. The men of New Antioch provided great support to the island when it was invaded by heretical forces, and they seek to provide support in kind as thanks. While for the men of Albia, it's nothing more than sweet revenge. Long have they suffered the raids of heretical forces upon their island home. Now it is their chance to get their hands around as many heretical necks as they can get. For nations like the Free State of Prussia is to prove their worth. Distrusted by most as a democracy among monarchies, sending the best of the best to defend the Holy City proves their loyalty among the faithful. It also allows the Stoßtruppen to gain new experiences and gain veterancy before heading back to Free Prussia, and allows for the Institute of War in Königsberg for field testing of their newest designs. Though this is not the fate of every warband that enters the city. In fact, many men who arrive to New Antioch seek to simply forego their past lives and to take up the cross, or in the case of the Principality, the Holy Spear Longinus, and the blue and red quarters of the state, becoming official yeomen of the Principality. The command and control of all city operations and the ducal military forces falls with one individual, the Duke of New Antioch. This is a privileged position, as it's considered the highest military commander within the Levant, and the official leader of the Crusades. It also commands a high seat among the Sword Council of Vienna. Only the Papal Legate and the Pope himself have more command over the ductal forces. It's the ductal command staff that are openly running all frontline operations within the Levant, and all infield commanders must at least officially report to the Duke concerning military matters, though there are plenty of examples of these forces balking that trend, particularly the Papal Intervention Forces. The Duke also commands one of the largest military forces within the Levant, with millions falling under his personal command. The Duke of New Antioch also has their hands in many construction projects throughout the city, both military and civilian, from new civilian infrastructure projects like wells, aqueducts, and sewer systems, to factories and munitions plants, to more military apparatus like the rebuilding of walls, fortifications of trenches, and new radar positions. Many of the new projects being brought by church engineers must first pass through approval by the ductal command staff to be used on the front lines. This also expands into monetary measures, as the currency of the Crusades is that of the New Antioch ducat. The ducat is the current currency of the principality, with the current duke's face imprinted on the front and a symbol of the city on the back. All purchases must come through ducats, meaning that even if the warbands don't officially follow the orders of the duke, they must at least play ball in order to get paid or to buy anything. But the duke is not just an organizational and overall military commander. They are an adept battlefield commander as well, and has been seen taking to the front lines himself on multiple occasions. The current duke is Duke Constantine XI, who is stated to don a specialized mechanized heavy infantry armor that is painted red and blue in the colors of the principality, and is stated to be carrying the literal spear of Longinus. Yes, they found the actual one, not the one that the monk tried to pass off in 1098. But the duke is also a master of soft power, and the people of the principality adore him. Many are stories of Duke Constantine XI donning a disguise and heading out to personally pray for the forgiveness and safety of his soldiers and the honoring of their dead run wild throughout the principality. He also personally dines with his soldiers of the Red Brigade before they hand out on missions, and seems generally disheartened when hearing about their deaths. While this position has many privileges, it's also fraught with dangers and is extremely tenuous. Constantine XI must be on constant guard for assassination attempts and infiltration missions, as the princes of hell want his head and want his kingdom destroyed. Constantine also must be a master of realpolitik, in order to juggle the thousands of viewpoints from both secular and religious commanders on how the Crusade should be won on the ever-changing battlefields. And so far, he's run it extremely well, as the principality has remained and is vying for positions in this lull between massive assaults by the heretics. So let us get into the armies the Duke runs, the types of units he brings to the field, and just what makes up the ductal forces. The yeomen are the standard riflemen of the principality, and can serve in numerous combat roles, from everything from vehicle operators, communication specialists, and artillerymen, to even snipers, machine gunners, and flamethrower operators. The yeomen can come from as far-flung places as Finland and Abyssinia, to as near as the former Byzantine lands and Italy. Men from all stripes come to serve the Duke directly, with many foregoing their former states. The army of New Antioch also contains a myriad of specialized combat troops, most notably the shock trooper corps, many of them hailing from the states of Free Prussia or Albia, personally gifted to the Duke, and serve as his spear. These men are known to break through enemy lines and be the first attacking forces. I've gone into the forces of the Stahlstruppen, and we'll be getting into Albia later, but these are the men that get into the heart of the fight, to take the fight directly to the heretics. Naturally, they have the highest casualty rate of any of the ductal forces. Another vital unit seen with the ductal forces is that of the Combat Engineering Corps. The Combat Engineering Corps are skilled in long-range combat and destruction of heretical defenses. Typically seen with submachine guns and satchel charges, they accompany shock troopers and other Stahlstruppen and the yeomen in their assaults on heretical positions, using their satchel charge to blow up heretical casemates and bunkers. The closest real-world comparison we have for the Combat Engineers of Trench Crusade is that of the Soviet Combat Engineers. Designed as a specialized unit to attack German trenches, much in the same way as their Trench Crusade counterparts. They're also heavily armored and carried submachine guns. The combat engineers started life around 1941-42, just after Operation Barbarossa, being the spear point of the Soviet counterattacks. They also have several religious units that take part in the ducal forces, most notably sniper priests. These priests and prioresses are known to ritually blind themselves before combat, either through the use of acid or some simply through iron spikes ripping out their eyes. But this allows the individual to see through the sight of God to guide their rounds themselves, and have been known to use their sniper rifles to hit targets over a mile away. And of course you have the Trench Cleric. The Trench Cleric is a specialized unit designed to help and support the forces of the front lines, and in some cases even lead men into battle. They're known in certain places to challenge heretical commanders, and to lead songs and hymns, carrying specialized holy relics of their denominations of Christianity. The final of these religious-based units is that of the combat medics. The combat medics come from a specialized sisterhood that takes a version of the Hippocratical Oath that calls for the saving of all faithful troops should they fall in combat, and the killing of any heretics should they fall as well. For this purpose, they are equipped with a special medicordia. This specialized dagger can find the little gaps in between plate mail and chain armor, allowing for a combat medic to essentially coup de grace an enemy combatant should they find them on the ground. While angels of mercy to the faithful, they are angels of death to their enemies. Finally, a major unit within the ductal forces and the rest of the faithful armies is that of the mechanized heavy infantry, with the household forces of the Duke containing brigades of this type of unit. The heavy mechanized infantry is the premier force of the faithful with both the Levant and the other fronts against Hell. Mechanized heavy infantry forces are handpicked from a young age, usually from the myriads of orphanages across Europa and North Africa. Thousands are made orphans due to the raids by heretical sea raiders, and of course the constant fighting in multiple different fronts, from the northern heretics down to the Levant itself. And there's no shortage of volunteers, due to various propaganda methods and the simple want for revenge, leads to no shortage of volunteers when a Mentalist recruitment party arrives at the orphanage. They are tested by the Mentalist Order to see if they could take on the various chemicals and holy smoke used to transform them into mechanized infantry, much like the Space Marines of 40K or the Spartans. These orphans are given multiple chemical enhancements to fit into the armor, for the suits for the mechanized heavy infantry are expensive and extremely hard to make, of pure orichalcum and other divine materials. It is much easier for the Mentalists to craft the flesh inside the suits, rather than getting a whole new suit. It is stated that many do not survive the process, either not being able to handle the chemicals, or dying from exhaustion. It's not really stated if they all just die or are just sent away to other facilities, though it is probably the former. They're also tested heavily for their mental acuity and use in combat. If you're going to make a hulking super soldier to be filled in a diesel-powered war mech suit, you better be damn sure they're a good one and won't just freak out the moment the bullets start flying. This process can take years, on average around a decade, as the recruits are usually picked around 7 years old. Should this individual prove to be worthy of wielding the armor, they achieve the term known as aspirants. These aspirants are sent for intensive training on the front lines at the age of 18. From there, they'll be led by some of the greatest veterans of the Long War to learn battlefield tactics. This process lasts almost a year, and the aspirant will either die in combat or become a veteran. Really a sink-or-swim moment when it comes to the mechanized heavy infantry. From there, should they prove worthy enough and combat-capable, they are entombed into their mechanized armor. It is stated that some of these suits have lasted for decades, with hundreds of individuals donning the armor before a new aspirant takes his turn. As part of the ritual of donning a new suit, the individual gives up their given name, and takes on what is known as a battle name. This battle name tends to be the name of the person that was originally given the suit when it was first created. The only thing that remains of the former aspirant's life is their own dog tags on a bronze plate edged with the original name of the aspirant. From there, they're pushed into different units, either operating anti-tank roles using anti-material rifles, close-quarters actions with axes and shields, or for most, heavy weapons, using the Maxim machine gun. By the age of 21, These aspirants are now honored veterans, and should they survive to the age of 30, they are purposely spirited away to the Duke's own household troops. From there, they join groups like the Red Brigade to provide heavy armor support through these special forces, or don heavily modified, even more modernized suits capable of airborne combat, flying into combat on mighty wings. These infantry forces attribute to the wide variety of units that we see within the New Antioch army. They are the reason that this city has lasted since the 1500s. But it's not just the infantry. Artillery brigades, armored division, and aerial escadrilles guard every aspect of the defense of the city. When it comes to air power, we can see everything from Sopwith Camels and Fokker aircraft to P-51s and even jet aircraft being used by New Antioch. When it comes to artillery, they're equipped with everything from 15cm howitzers from Germany, 18-pounders from Great Britain, and 75mm cannons from France, along with numerous other trench mortars, howitzers, and artillery cannons. For armored divisions, everything from French FTs and Snyders to British Mark IVs and Vs, all the way up to more World War II designs like the Soviet-built IS-2, Crusader tanks, and even M3 Lees are probably seen within the church arsenal, not to mention the different tanks from across the other nations such as Poland and Czechoslovakia. So let's get into the type of gear that we can see within New Antioch. What exactly do the yeomen and shock troopers wear into combat, and what weapons do they wield to the forefront? When looking at the uniforms and equipment of the New Antioch forces, they're not too dissimilar to that of the British Empire and their Commonwealth troops, but they seem to be getting much of their design and a lot of their equipment from a whole other force, that being the American Expeditionary Forces. We can see that the uniforms of the New Antioch yeomen especially are very similar to that of the AEF's uniforms, from their puttees, webbings, boots, and even their headgear. In instances where the yeomen are not wearing their Sallet helms, they're seen wearing two different types of headgear. A Brodie-style helmet, and more interestingly, an American-style overseas side cap. Now these side caps were standard issue campaign hats for both officers and enlisted of the AEF. We can see tons of photos of these soldiers during training, or overseas in foreign garrisons and embassies wearing these caps. Most notably even before the Great War at the Boxer Rebellion, the American soldiers in those photos are wearing these side caps. During the First World War, the side cap was the standard issue in-garrison hat for the AEF. These would be mixed in with the more ubiquitous campaign hat. As far as the yeomen are concerned, we can see several instances of them wearing side caps. It appears that the side cap would be the standard issue garrison hat for any New Antioch forces when not deployed on the front. The other form of headgear that is commonly seen is a Brodie-style helmet. Now the Brodie is a design originally from Great Britain. The British War Department had noticed that the vast majority of injuries and fatalities of their men on the front came from head wounds and shrapnel wounds, mainly caused by artillery. Keep in mind that the Great War was an artilleryman's conflict. Millions of shells are fired every single day, and in some cases, like the Battle of Verdun, quite literally over 1 million shells were fired in a single morning, meaning that head wounds far outpaced any other form of trauma suffered by soldiers in combat. To face this, many nations went back in time to some of their Homer helmet designs from medieval times to find use in the trenches. The French notably were some of the first to do this, designing the Adrian helm in 1915. This was followed by the Germans with their ubiquitous Stahlhelm, designed after a medieval Sallet helm. For Great Britain, inventor John Leopold Brodie would design a helm based off another standardized helmet design from the Middle Ages, the Kettle helm. The Kettle helm was pretty ubiquitous all across Europe, being seen among archers and infantrymen. By 1915, this steel helmet Mark I became the standard issue helmet of the entirety of Great Britain and its Commonwealth, with millions being produced. The Brodie became known for a myriad of names, from the shrapnel helmet, battle bowler, Tommy helmet and tin hat, to a more mocking name by the German army, the salad bowl. The Brodie helmet would find its way to the American military as well, with the American War Department liking the design and designing their own localized variant known as the M1917. The M1917, also referred to as the Doughboy helmet, became the standard issue helmet of the entirety of the American military, seen among Navy, Marines, and Army forces. Now, when it comes to the naming conventions of American military equipment, almost everything is referred to with M and the year it was designed or produced next to it. So M1917 can mean everything from a Renault FT tank locally produced to a bayonet, but in this case, it's the Steel Helmet Mark I. When looking at the M1917 and the Brody, they're a near one-to-one design match, though the American Defense Department changed several things about the helmet, most notably the straps and some of the webbing to provide better comfort for the soldier and concussion protection. And most notably, would go on to paint the top of the helmet with a different type of material. This combated a major flaw of the Brody. The Brody reflected light rather easily. This caused a glare off the helmet that made the soldier an easy target for snipers. To combat this, the British military issued canvas coverings for their Brodies. In the United States, they developed a brand new form of texture paint. Think like the similar paints they used to base a model. This made the M1917 have a rougher texture, with little clumps of material all across the helmet. This allowed it to reflect light a lot less and provided more protection from the soldier, making them less of a target. This is actually the easiest way you can tell the difference between a Brody and a Doughboy helmet. Your M1917 has this thicker material on top and almost looks like sandpaper, while the Brody is much more smooth. We can also see American origins in a lot of the kit New Antioch produces, most notably the rifle webbing for their yeomen. The webbing appears to be the M1910 pattern, which was the standard issue webbing for all American soldiers during the First World War, notable for having rifle pouches across the belt, which we can see in many of the images and models of the yeomen. Though for the yeomen, this appears to be a dark brown color rather than the khaki of the American military. We can also see what appears to be M1936 pouches for SMGs used by their combat engineers. We can also see traditional crossbody slings of rifle ammunition as well, though this was used by multiple countries. And a mixture of the M1908 pattern from the British Commonwealth is also mixed in. New Antioch also favors an olive drab uniform for its fighters. This is actually very similar to the United States Marine uniform of World War I, which was also the same color of olive green. And especially their ambulance services. The ambulance and medic corps also wore a full olive drab uniform while in combat. While AEF connections are the main part of the kit and weapons used by New Antioch, we do see mixes of other faithful nations, from the Germans to the British and French, also making some instances in their uniform. And notably, medieval armor. We see many units wielding some form of medieval armor, mostly in their helmets being the Sallet. The Sallet was a standardized helmet that we saw across Europe between the 14th and 15th centuries. Most famous in the HRE for the Gothic helm, and had its start in Italy. We also see various forms of chainmail, breastplates, pauldrons, and knee guards, mostly with the shock troopers and the lieutenants. Advancements in metallurgy have allowed these items to be lightweight and be able to provide even more protection, with breastplates being able to stop standard rifle rounds. Medieval-style breastplates and other forms of armor were attempted during World War I, though proved highly ineffective, being too heavy for an individual soldier to carry into combat, and forcing the soldier, should he do so, to just walk onto the battlefield, which is not ideal. Most of this armor would end up being static emplacements, such as sniper shields. Though we do see some instances, particularly with the German lobster shell armor, being used for sentries and machine guns emplacements. Though notably, these are static troops, not those moving into combat. The only other major difference between a lot of the AEF uniform equipment and New Antioch is that of the combat engineers' breastplates and standard armor. This armor closely resembles their real-life counterparts, the Soviet combat engineers. Another major connection between the AEF and New Antioch comes down to their culture. The American Expeditionary Force prided itself on being an international force, with millions in its ranks serving from first or second generation immigrant families, with many of them fresh off the boats themselves, enlisting in the army to prove their worth. This was particularly true with the German Americans, eager to prove that they were loyal Americans in a culture that was heavily against them at this point. Wilson was heavily distrusting of anybody of German ancestry, changing things like sauerkraut into American cabbage, and dachshunds into freedom hounds. So yes, these things have existed since time immemorial in the United States. We also have service records from men from across the Far East and Latin America serving within the AEF, and the U.S. territories of Guam and Puerto Rico sent thousands to serve. We also would be remiss without mentioning the deeds of the African American soldiers in the war, particularly from the 92nd Division and the 396th, the Harlem Hellfighters, serving valiantly despite the heavy levels of discrimination and the official segregation within the American military at that time. It was hoped that service within the Great War would be a stepping stone to desegregate the American military. Unfortunately, it would take 2 more wars and an official order from the president to officially desegregate the American armed forces. Many members of the Harlem Hellfighters served with great honor, being one of the first units to reach the Rhine and never giving up any ground. Many members of the Harlem Hellfighters went above and beyond the call of duty in their service, though unfortunately, due to the discrimination of the day, found themselves not properly rewarded in their lifetimes. Taken to the 2000s in some cases, these men would earn high rewards like Distinguished Service Cross and the Medal of Honor. One of these examples being Sergeant Henry Johnson. Johnson and one other soldier fought off an entire company of attacking Germans, saving his trench, near single-handedly, throwing grenades, and even engaging in hand-to-hand combat to chase them off. This connection to the American forces doesn't just stop at their uniforms, kit, and culture. Many of their weapon designs have US origins. In fact, outside of their standard SMLE Mark III as their bolt-action rifle, much of their weapons are American. The SMLE being one of the most common rifles to be produced during the war, with millions being produced for the entirety of the Commonwealth forces and the forces of Great Britain, seeing action from across every battlefield of the Great War. Though past this, much of their weapon designs are completely American. One of the most obvious ones is the Thompson submachine gun, which has a surprising World War I origin. Designed in 1918 for use of the Marine Corps to break the front lines of German trenches, though the war ended before it ever reached trials, with the first prototypes being produced in 1919 and being adopted by the Marines in 1921. Gaining notoriety in the interwar period, especially with the gangsters of the time, it'd see full service in World War II. Another purely American design is that of the BAR, or Browning Automatic Rifle. The Browning Automatic Rifle, or M1918, yet another weapon or kit piece with M1918 in its title, was developed as a response to the absolute failure that was the AEF version of the French Sochaux machine gun. The Sochaux was not designed for the 30-06 round being used by the Americans, and had a tendency to break apart. There was also the problem of the barrel width not being wide enough for the 30-06 round, and simply getting stuck in the barrel. Or exploding, which is not ideal. In response, a very angry John Moses Browning developed the M1918. One of the most advanced automatic rifles of the war, you'd see minimal service at the final few months. This was mostly due to the fact that it was so advanced that General Pershing didn't want one of these systems to be captured and reverse engineered by the Germans. It would end up having a very long service life, seeing service all the way into the Korean War, though by that point it was heavily outdated and was pushed into a role it was not designed for, being a squad light machine gun rather than an automatic rifle as it was initially designed. We can also see in several pieces of artwork depicting new Antioch lieutenants that they're wielding what appears to be a 45 ACP M1911 as their standard sidearm. The M1911 was the standard issue sidearm of the United States military starting just before World War I and expanding on to almost the 1990s in most cases. The M1911 fired a 45 caliber ACP round and was one of the heaviest rounds for any pistols in the First World War. And fun fact, it was actually in a battle with Luger to provide the standard issue sidearm, as they produced a 45 caliber Luger. We can also see them using the Remington 1897 shotgun, developed for the American military in 1897 for the rebellions in the Philippines. It became the mainline shotgun and was heavily used in the First World War. Referred to as both the trench gun or the trench sweeper, it was capable of firing up to 12 high-powered slugs in a single minute. They were able to fill 6 rounds in one single magazine, meaning they were extremely effective at clearing German trenches. The Marines used it to such great effect that the German military attempted to declare it a war crime. Rather ironic coming from the guys who developed mustard and chlorine gas, but gaining 12 slugs fired into your trench section can make anybody see God for a second. Naturally, this was heavily ignored, leading to the Germans declaring that they will just execute anybody seen with shotgun rounds. There's also a lot of their weapons that have US design origins, though they're more famous for being used by other nations. Most notably, the light machine gun, the Lewis gun. The Lewis gun was designed by American Ordnance Officer John Lewis, intended for use with the American military, though the high brass of the time decided they did not need a light machine gun of this type. Discouraged, Lewis transferred his equipment over, along with his prototype, to Belgium, where his company would finish the design and patent it to the Belgian army and later the British army, who also paid him to finish up the design. Used across the British Commonwealth, it was a common sight in the First World War with its distinctive 97-round rotary magazine, though it also could be belt-fed. And when the United States would eventually join the war in 1917, they would go on to purchase many of these Lewis guns. The Lewis gun proving much more effective than the Chauchat. The Lewis, being a lighter form of the machine gun, allowed for a single man to carry it into combat, though traditionally it would have a crew of 2 or 3 fully manning it. The Lewis gun would go on to earn multiple nicknames during the war as well, one of the most famous ones being the Belgian Rattlesnake, due to how effective it was being used by the Belgian soldiers against the Germans. And this appears to be the standard issue light machine gun for all of New Antioch's warbands, as we see it from everything from the sniper priests to standard yeomen, and even their vehicles and emplacements using the Lewis. We can also see various levels of equipment that are not US based with their weapons, from Italian, Russian, French, and British designs, to even ones from Poland and Scandinavia. Keep in mind of just how much is being sent to New Antioch from the entirety of the faithful nations as part of the tithe, where equipment and weapons is the main source of this tithe. One notable piece of kit that definitely does not have a US origin is that of their hand grenades, as it appears that the yeomen use a variation of the Stalag Handgranate. The Stalag Handgranate was the standard German grenade, famous for their trench grenadiers used in their stormtrooper battalions carrying bundles of these grenades and haversacks to assault the enemy. The Germans made multiple hand grenade designs throughout the war, with many of them looking pretty wacky, with different ways of explosive force, shrapnel, concussive, incendiary, and gas, to some with fins on the top for better aerodynamics, to ones that don't even look anywhere near what you'd expect for a German grenade of this time, though they focused in on the Stalag Handgranate as their standard issue. Given an axe handle, the Stalag Handgranate could be thrown further than their traditional grenade, and it was notably for being a concussive grenade rather than a shrapnel grenade. The difference is the shrapnel grenade kills well with shrapnel. Think the M2 grenade of the United States of World War II, or the Mills bomb, where it would explode and metal shards would go flying out, and that's where most of the damage comes from it. Though with the Stalag Handgranate, it was concussive, meaning that it was entirely focused on killing through concussive force. While having less killing power, they're able to be more compact and have greater throwing arcs. We can see different variations across the New Antioch warbands of the Stalag, though most of it appears to be the 1917 or 1916 variation used by the various German soldiers, though we can see specialized MIR grenades and incendiary grenades handed out to warbands. These MIR grenades exploding in specialized chemicals that can burn demonic flesh to cinder. Well, going on to about an hour in discussion, I believe we've reached the end of what we have to kind of go into with New Antioch, its history, and the soldiers that defend it. New Antioch and the city itself has such a great history in both timelines. There's a reason why it's one of the main factions of the game. I was also extremely surprised to find the AEF connections with the New Antioch army. It's not something you really think of, and especially with the lore stating that North America, the United States, and a lot of Latin America doesn't really exist so far, or hasn't really been added. We don't know what's going on over on that part of the world due to the invasion of hell. So it's cool to kind of get this US adjacent force. So again, thank you if you guys have lasted this long. I know I tend to ramble, but if you like what I'm doing here, please feel free to like and subscribe. I apologize for a bit longer. I'm trying to at least keep a video a month so far, but life got in the way a bit, and also just the amount of research into just the forces of not only New Antioch, but the American Expeditionary Forces, in just the history of Antioch itself, as it goes all the way back to the Seleucid Empire. There's a lot there, so trying to find a happy medium of all that and putting it into one video is rather hard. And if you guys want to see this more split up into different videos, let me know. So thanks again if you made it this far. I hope you guys really enjoyed this. It was very fun to kind of go into this history. And I'm definitely going to keep doing this here with Trench Crusade and branching out into different worlds. I mentioned last time looking into New Vegas and the NCR, but I'll also be looking into back to 40k and back to different worlds, maybe even a bit of BattleTech. It just all kind of on the wind right now as I'm trying to figure out kind of how to get into a good rhythm. I'm going to definitely be focusing on trying to getting at least one video a month. Thanks again for you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed. You have a good day, night, whatever it is, and I got to get back to the archives. Have a good one.